The views and opinions expressed in each show are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its presenters as a whole. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to Seventh Sanctum with Kerry, only on Parasearch UK Radio.
Hello and welcome. I am Kerry and you're listening to Seventh Sanctum. It is Thursday, it is 9 p.m. and we're starting your paranormal weekend off really early. We've got a fantastic show for you this evening. We're all really excited. But I want to introduce firstly my co-host for the evening. This is Kerry Greenaway. Hello, Kerry.
Hello, darling. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Really well. I'll tell you what I was doing just before we come onto the show. And this is just going to be really well for everyone. I was on Facebook and up popped the Tom Hardy CBB Valentine special. So I was well in my element just before I come on.
Good
so I thought
Tom
share that with everyone. I know, right? I know. But it was fantastic. But this show tonight, we're talking about Jack the Ripper. It is a controversial subject. It is a subject that is, a favourite for most. There has lots of followers, lots of theories, and we've been very, very fortunate this evening to have with us Russell Edwards, who's an author. He has a book called Naming Jack the Ripper. Fantastic book. But welcome, Russell.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're really, really excited for tonight's show. Can't wait.
I'm in my element talking to somebody who knows so much about the subject. So, Russell, thank you so much for coming on. We're really, really thrilled, aren't we?
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's been a while since I've done an interview now.
Fantastic. So, when we were, I was kind of looking at I've come across lots of things, interviews and on YouTube. I've been really kind of looking up some of your theories and your evidence and your research that you've done. It's all really fascinating. And the one question that comes to me first and foremost was, who is Jack the Ripper? Sorry, Jack the Ripper. More so, what did he represent? What is he?
Well, the name Jack the Ripper is, it comes from a letter that was sent to the Central News Agency all the way back on the 27th of September 1888, called the Dear Boss letter, which is written in red ink and sort of, it really threatened to kill more of these unfortunates in the East End. But it was signed, don't mind giving the trade name, Jack the Ripper. It says, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. So the name itself comes from a letter. Now, 2 days after that letter was received by the Central News Agency, the two Ripper victims, were murdered on the same night, so within an hour of each other. So it really held, as if that letter really was written by the murderer, and that's it. The name Jack the Ripper stuck ever since. So that's what it is really. It nowadays, and since then, I would say really, it just represents a bit like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde character that doesn't really exist. It's not real. It sort of covers the fact that it covers that there was a serial killer that butchered 5 women in the East End in 10 weeks, and that's what it represents. But really, where I come from is really, well, who was it? Which is the big question that's been going on for 126 years, really, till we solved it a couple of years ago. Who was this man that really came to the East End, did these abhorrent murders, and then just vanished into thin air? And it was only 10 weeks, the time period he committed these crimes. And then he just seemed to vanish, and that was it. with the name like that, it just stuck and it's just stuck in history, really. So that's what really Jack the Ripper is. It's a name that was given from a letter called the Dear Boss letter that really just rung out and stuck to this murderer. But what I can tell you is the head of the case, the guy that was in charge, believed that the letter was the work of an enterprising journalist. And a few years ago, there was a documentary that they found it was a reporter that wrote that letter, and it was a reporter that gave that name. So the name Jack the Ripper and the serial killer that murdered these women have no connection whatsoever.
And it's a name that has resonated throughout the years as well, isn't it? It does have a hook. And so you said that it was a journalist that allegedly had sent these letters out.
Oh no, they're
very good at hooks.
No, they actually did the handwriting analysis, and they proved who the author, the writer of that letter was, and it was a reporter, not the murderer. But I mean, there were so many back then. That was the first, and then there was a whole ream of letters all sent to the police. All signed by yours truly, Jack the Ripper. It did set off a real, a furore of these letters, all of which were all fake as well, except for one, which is one I believe he did actually write, which is a very famous one called the Lusk letter. Mm-hmm. And the address was from hell, which linked to the film, the Johnny Depp film, which has really caught my attention to the whole story in the first place.
Was that the letter that had the body part with it?
That's it. Yeah, half. It was sent to the head of the Vigilance Committee, a guy called George Lusk, and it's called the Lusk letter. In fact, it had half of a human kidney that they believed was half of the fourth murder victim, Catherine Eddowes. It was hers because she had a kidney taken. I know it's sort of after you sort of become battle hardened. I have over the decades of this story, but he took body parts from the victims, or four of the victims, and unfortunately for Catherine Eddowes, he took two body parts, one of which was a kidney. So yes, there was a letter and a body part sent to the head of the Vigilance Committee, and it's the only letter not signed Jack the Ripper.
See, that's interesting in itself, isn't it? That's the only letter that wasn't signed.
Exactly, it's quite morbid when you think about it. It's again in itself, it's a very renowned, famous letter. Again, in this day, what can we prove? Because that was sent to Leman Street Police Station, I believe, and I think about 3 weeks after it disappeared.
Ooh.
Yeah, it vanished into thin air.
See, this is the thing that I've come to realise with this in particular case. This case in particular, it's so steeped in mystery. Just seems every time there seems to be a corner turned, there's another corner. Nothing seems to be. Things seem to be hidden and covered up and kind of not well. I mean, at that time, investigations as such by the police wouldn't have ever been done to today's standard just because of the time. But it just seems to be so much had gone on that could have pointed into the right direction, but for one reason or another, it just didn't come to light properly, did it?
Well, you know what? If you go back to that case, the police did the best. They did a huge amount of investigation. It's certainly they left no stone unturned, and they did the utmost to perfection at that period in time to investigate this case. But you've got to remember, back then, no forensic science, no fingerprints were in the early days. So photographs, photography of crimes and victims was in its infancy. So these are the victims' photographs are some of the first. Would you believe if you do the real research, as I did, you will find in the archives one of the very first ever criminal profiles was done on this murderer.
Really?
Yeah. It's it really did set off, I would say, how investigations would be done from then on. I mean, very seriously, they did. They left no stone unturned. And I would hazard a guess that at this point, the opportunists over the years sort of dipped in and thought, oh, I'll have that, I'll take that home, and things keep on cropping up. Just remember, just very briefly, with the Yorkshire Ripper, it was because of that case the police national computer was set up, the network.
Mm.
So that even though abhorrent, truly abhorrent as it is, what it really did is it really did help how investigations were carried on from there,
And when you consider the very early stages of the police force at that time, they were in a real, almost like a baby phase, weren't they, the police force? It was only quite a relatively recent thing,
well,
an
the
organised police force.
Yeah, they were set up by Robert Peel back in 1829, the Metropolitan Police. But yeah, I can tell you this, what Scotland Yard told me. There were very strict rules, extremely strict rules, so they had to, they couldn't bend anything at all. And in this case, there was a part of it, I'm sure we'll get onto, where the strict rules forbid them, because they actually had their man arrested and identified. But because of the strict rules, they couldn't do more than what they did.
No, I think looking back at the police and what they'd done at that time, me personally, I'm a bit of a novice, and I don't know very much, or as much as I could do, about the topic or the subject of this case in particular. So, for those listeners that are kind of relatively new and not really familiar to how it all began, would you be able to explain that to us, some of the victims and what happened, please?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So if we go back to Victorian London, especially the East End, in that period, even now, I would say there was a huge, by 1881, there was a huge influx of Polish Jewish immigrants into the area. And it was sort of this, we would call this the cesspit of London, if you like, of humanity, where the destitute class, an extremely violent area it was. And there was about 1,200 what we call unfortunates walking up and down these really dimly lit cobblestone streets, selling their bodies for as little as 4 pennies, living a day-to-day existence in the doss houses, which was spread all through the East End, all through this part of Whitechapel and Spitalfields. There were, in fact, 11 Whitechapel murders, 5 of which were attributed to Jack the Ripper, or the myth, the legend of Jack the Ripper. But there were 2 before, one on the 3rd of April, and this also sort of typifies the area. So you've got all these violent criminals types, if you like, walking these streets, and these poor women encountering them just on a day-to-day basis. There was a woman called Emma Smith who was beaten violently to the ground, and she was stabbed in between her legs, so much so that she was left. They ruptured her perineum, so they left her in a pool of blood to die. Nothing really was done about it. She died a few days later. That was in April. That's sort of, well, we'll never find the criminal. Just remember, back then, you either have to have a full confession or a confession, or you have to catch him in the act. That's how you catch these murderers, or a murderer back then. Then, on about the 7th of August, a woman by the name of Martha Tabram, she was found on a first floor landing of one of these, like what you call like a destitute hovel type refuge in a place called Gunthorpe Street. She was stabbed 39 times. Then within 3 weeks, the first acknowledged, what we say, one of the canonical 5 victims was found. And this poor unfortunate by the name of Polly Nichols, well, she was called Polly, but her real name was Mary Ann Nichols, in her 40s, really down on her luck. Now, she was found in a place called Bucks Row in the early hours of the 31st of August 1888, so only 3 weeks after Martha. Now, Polly was laid out in a specific way. Her legs were apart, her arms stretched out with her palms up, and her head facing to the left. It turned out she'd been, I would say, disemboweled and her throat cut. Now, a woman on the streets of London found like this, butchered, There was a neighbouring house by where Polly was found, and the woman in that house couldn't sleep that night, and she didn't hear a thing, no muffled cry, no footsteps, no, how would you say, a confrontation. So this murderer's MO was throttle. He would cut the throats and he would disembowel them. That was his MO. Now, most people, when they say Jack the Ripper, you think of a top hat and tails and a Gladstone bag. This is far from the truth. No eyewitness ever saw anything like that of the kind near these victims whatsoever. So it's like this, where this myth sort of then overrides the truth, which is what my fundamental aim was, to prove that the truth, not the fiction, not the titillation that people find in the name Jack the Ripper. So Polly was the first. A week later, another poor unfortunate by the name of Annie Chapman was found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. Now, you find with most serial killers that the violence escalates. This is only a week after Polly was found and 4 weeks after Martha was found. Annie Chapman, throat cut down to a spinal cord. This time, not only she'd been disemboweled, he cut the flap of her abdomen completely off and laid it to the side of her body. He took out her intestines and placed them over her shoulder, and he took her uterus with him. So, just even as I say these words, you just think of just how horrific, if that happened today, just what this would bring to the world. But back then, these poor women had they had no homes to go to, no place to just escape. Just similar to Stephen Wright, the strangler up in Ipswich. When you look back to these women were getting murdered, and on the news a woman was being interviewed saying, "I've got nowhere to go, I've got no choice," and she was his next victim. So bringing it back to 1888 Whitechapel in the autumn, these women they had no safety zone. They were stuck in their lifestyle, and this murderer just weaving through them and butchering them. So then that was the 8th of September. The Ripper letter comes out on the 27th of September, and then the night of the 29th, he went out and he murdered 2 inside an hour. So going from the night into the first hour so when you get the dates, you say the 30th of September, which is the actual fact of the murder date, but actually it was the night of the 29th. So at 1 o'clock in the morning, in Duffield's Yard, which is like a stable yard in Berners Street, Elizabeth Stride, she was a Swedish immigrant, lived over in Whitechapel, lived in the area. She was attacked. She was seen being attacked by a man described as 5'5", 5'7", foreign, which back then meant Jewish, dark hair, dark moustache, stocky. He was seen attacking Elizabeth Stride and trying to drag her into Duffield's Yard. Within 10 minutes, another, not a witness, but actually the man that discovered the body of Elizabeth Stride, a guy called Louis Deemschutz, he just happened upon the victim. We call Elizabeth as the victim, and saw that she'd had a throat cut, but there was no body parts taken. There was no mutilation other than her throat being cut, which is abhorrent in itself. This is because the murder was interrupted by Louis Deemschutz and managed to make his escape. 45 minutes later, in another part of town, which is actually only, in reality, it's 10 minutes, 40 seconds away. Trust me, I've timed it when I did the research to make sure how you get to 2 places at once. In Mitre Square, which is in the City of London, Catherine Eddowes was found at 1:45 by the police. PC Watkins, his name was, the policeman that patrolled Mitre Square, and he mutilated her so violently that really it's just the atrocity. We call it the atrocities what he did to her. So he mutilated her face virtually beyond recognition, cut her throat, disemboweled her, placed her intestines again over her shoulder. He took a kidney and a uterus. Now the thing is, he did that in a window of 8 minutes, and managed to not even be seen, sort of vanish as if like a shadow, like a spectre, if you like, just disappeared, and then went silent. And he went silent for 4 weeks and 10 days. But the significance of Catherine Eddowes is where the shawl was left. Now, it wasn't me. I'll tell you what, we'll come on to that, I'm sure. But the final victim, she was different. Mary Jane Kelly was only 25. The other 4 victims were in the 40s. Mary Jane Kelly had her own room. She didn't live a day-to-day existence like the other four unfortunates. And he had time with her, where he murdered these poor women, sort of in open streets, if so to speak. Mary Jane Kelly was murdered in her own room. And whenever I tell people this, I mean, this is how bad to see the photo, the actual crime scene photograph, which is the only one that exists of what he did. I wouldn't go through what I can just tell you is she really was left in pieces, and they couldn't find her. Her heart was missing. So the last victim, he took a heart. But if you do see the crime photograph, there's no photograph in existence of Mary Jane Kelly that no one's ever shown. They don't even know if it was Mary Jane Kelly, because he just, how I can say this live, he left no face. He took her face off entirely. It's just, and then he just disappeared. That was his last acknowledged murder. And this is where the name sort of carried over. I wouldn't say I would say actually it diminished what this murderer really, the true murderer, the true serial killer, rage killer, if you like, what he did to these women, and the sort of the romance of the Victorian era, and the fact that this is like a spectral being, if you like, which he certainly wasn't, has all been sort of cloaked under the name of, you say, Jack the Ripper. And it's the Jack the Ripper part that's carried, not the fact that this a real serial killer butchered these 5 women. And this is when I got involved, when I bought the show. It's nearly 10 years ago now. My aim was to highlight the real murderer and not perpetuate the myth of Jack the Ripper, which is what so many people seem to do.
Thank you. That was I really do appreciate. It sounds like as well, I just comment, you've got such empathy for these women as well. It's really quite, you can tell that you're coming from such a caring place when you describe what's happened to them. It is really sad. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I just want to go into the chat room. We have some people leaving comments, and Sin in the chat room. So I always wondered if he was trying to send a particular message with how he left the ladies. Did you feel that was something he did? It does seem like it escalated and escalated in that time period between the second from last victim and the last victim. It does seem the last victim really exploded almost with him.
Yeah.
So do you think there was, your opinion, do you think there was a message he was trying to give? Why did, the face and the woman, the womb, the uterus, sorry, why those,
I would only be speculating. Where I come from is really who it was, and only if I didn't have the shawl, I would have never been able to answer any questions. But really, watching a lot of the research that notable people have done through the years, one of the things was how he actually performed the mutilations. So whether he kneeled down between the women's legs, so he pulled them apart so he could actually work. There was that. I've absolutely no idea why he would take the uterus, to be honest, why that particular body part. There was a speculation, but it'd be only pure speculation. So I haven't got a theory on any of this. It was my theories of I've not had any theory. It's been fact, really. Okay. But what I can say is he did have a ritualistic manner about the way he conducted these murders, and each one they were recognisable that they were committed by him. But I certainly don't know why he would leave the head facing to the left, the arms, palms out, arms out, palms upwards. But I can see, if you're kneeling down to perform this, he would need to be placed between the legs so he could take the uterus. Somebody, I don't know whether I could say this live on air, but somebody did suggest to me once what he actually took the uteruses home, or the uteri, what he did with them when he got home. But it would only be speculation. The only person that could really answer that for you is him. Right.
Yes. Like, yeah. I mean, it is. There's lots and lots of questions being asked as well in the and again speculation in the chat room. But with we touched upon how the police would have dealt with this and how well they did deal with it at the time. But with each case, what would have been the protocol for them? What would have been how would they have dealt with these? Because this was the first of the kind, really, that to such an extent.
Yeah, it was unique. It still is unique. Well, as you well know, if you don't, I'll explain.
No, I don't.
Okay, so there was a team of sergeants that, sort of an Inspector Abeline was brought in. Inspector Abeline was seconded because he had a good working knowledge of the area. And he was the man on the ground, and he was under Sir Charles Warren. Then you had Robert Anderson and Donald Swanson. But the men on the ground, the sergeants, so there was a Sergeant Godley, Sergeant Thick. These guys, then the actual the policemen themselves, number one was to patrol and investigate. Literally, if you look through the research, you'll see they knocked on every single door. When the double, it was called the double event, they knocked on they went through every DOS house. They literally woke every single person up to see if there was anybody that he was hiding in one of the beds. They searched the area thoroughly, But again, if I bring it back so we're talking 1888, bring it back to 1976, 77 when the Yorkshire Ripper was about. That all the police ever did then was gather information. In the same way, they didn't really collect it in a way that it was usable. It wasn't workable. And back then, they certainly weren't equipped whatsoever properly to deal with this case. But they did their utmost and their very best to do what they did. So that's about it, really.
I'm wondering, Kerry, have you got any questions?
Well, I think that sums up the bare bones of Jack the Ripper. I'm really interested to know how you first came involved in Jack the Ripper. I mean, from a personal perspective, it's you kind of grow up with that myth, don't you? But where did you first start?
Strangely enough, absolutely no connection to Jack the Ripper whatsoever. I came to London oddly enough, in 1989, so nearly 100 years after. And one of my close friends lived in Bethnal Green, which is in the East End. And as we were doing our assignments and studying, we used to go to it's in Brick Lane, a place called Bagel Bake, which is like a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week bagel shop. Mm-hmm. And you can, even now, you know what, you could feed a family of 4 for about a tenner. But back then, we were poor students. Cream cheese and a cup of tea was like 60p. So that's what we used to live on as poor students. And I don't know whether it is a stereotype being from Liverpool or from Merseyside and loving curry, but I do love curry. And I found all these amazing, very cool curry houses where they do corkage, so you take your own drinks. So you eat for about £5, and that's what we used to do at weekends, and it was brilliant. And I just fell in love with the area. It does actually, For anyone that has never been, it really has something. It really has like a street level coolness that you have to experience, sort of absorb. Even go down there at Brick Lane Market on a Sunday, just go down there, how brilliant this place is. And so that's where we just start, you don't have to be posh, you don't have to be rich, you don't have to show off. You can just be yourself, and that's what I loved about it. So I was in and out of that area, Brick Lane, for 11 years. So we set up a very large software company back in the late 90s, 94 onwards, and all my corporate clients used to fly all over the world. I'd take them for a curry in Brick Lane. And then I watched this film called From Hell with Johnny Depp. Mm-hmm. It's nearly 17 years ago now.
Oh, make me feel old.
So the thing is, it was, I was like, well, okay, so where's this Ten Bells pub? Where did he do all these murders? And I went on a really excellent Ripper tour on very cold Saturday afternoon. And it turned out that it's literally all close to Brick Lane, where I'd been for 11 years. And I was like, oh my God, this was on my doorstep. Now, through studying, the one thing I learned was not to read someone else's opinion. If you read a book, it's that person's opinion that wrote that book. Mm-hmm. Especially in this, because there is no scientific evidence, or there certainly wasn't back in 2000. So anyway, I did what I say for me is pretty obvious. The way I think and the way I live is I called Scotland Yard and I asked where could I access all the files, because I realised, I don't know if you know about the 100-year rule. After 100 years, the files become open. Anybody could go and ask, and access them. Right. So I was told to go to the Metropolitan Archives in Kew. Guess what? It's all down there. All what you need to start with, if you really want to know about this case, it's all down there. So the Ripper letters, all the lots of the Metropolitan Police documents. So this mystery became live. And I did ask Scotland Yard. I said, well, why was he never caught? And he said, look, and they just wouldn't answer. They said, just go down there. Well, anyway, what I can tell you is this. If you think you can find Jack the Ripper through the Ripper archives at the Metropolitan Kew, you'd be just kidding yourself, because all it is lots and lots of information. But that's all. There's nothing there that says this was Jack the Ripper. It doesn't exist down there. So I left her alone. Still in the curry houses, thought, what a mystery. I wonder if anyone would ever solve it one day, and left it there. In March 2007, I get a call. So it's really nearly 10 years ago now. I get a call saying, am I still interested in this case? And I said, well, no one's ever really going to solve it because there's no real proof. There's nothing in existence left from those days. And then I get told that there's a shawl that was taken from, well, not taken, there was a shawl that was found at the 4th murder scene by an acting sergeant, a guy called Amos Simpson. And it's his great-great-grandnephew who's selling it in an auction house about 20 minutes from where I lived. So I thought, wow, let's just go and have a look at that, because you never know. Now, the shawl itself's about, I'd say it's about just under 9 foot. And it's about 2 foot wide. It's huge. When I went, you're allowed to view it before the auction day. Went to have a look. It's really just to see it's old, and it's got like a pattern of Michaelmas daisies on there, which is what it says in the if you say the blurb, which is the provenance, if you like. So the pattern of Michaelmas daisies, but more significantly, if you look on the reverse side, the inside of the shawl. Well, it's covered in. Well, it's not. Yes, it is actually covered in blood. When I say covered in blood, it's not like you would see 2 huge blood clots. And I didn't know at the time, but the blue section, which is about 2 foot by 2 foot, it's completely covered in arterial blood spatter. But at that time, I didn't recognise that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I thought, wow, what if this is real? So my wife at the time said to me, you're not having that. So she set the challenge down for me. And again, I called Scotland Yard because it says in the provenance that it was kept in the Black Museum all through the 90s. But they ended up giving it back to the original owner, and it was the guy who was selling it. So when I called Scotland Yard, the Black Museum, they said to me, well, we don't believe it's real. But if you find anything, as long as you say it was alleged that it was a shawl from the murder scene, you're covered, and that's it. And that's all I had to go on at the time. So I have sort of like this very inquiring mind. So I thought, well, what's Michaelmas Daisies? Let's start there. Because if you look at the newspaper reports, and there's at least 15, 16 newspaper reports saying Michaelmas Daisies. Michaelmas Daisies are little flowers that come out in September. And they do match the pattern on the shawl, but that's all. So I thought, well, that doesn't help really. And then I looked up the word Michaelmas. And Michaelmas was the reason why I got involved and bought the shawl. Michaelmas is an Eastern Orthodox Christian celebration and Western Christian celebration celebrated on 2 specific dates of the year. Those 2 dates are the 29th of September and the 8th of November. And lo and behold, those 2 dates are the 2 nights that the murderer went out and murdered 3 of his 5 victims. That actually blew me away. There was a full and proper link for the shawl, the Michaelmas Daisies pattern, and 3 of the 5 murders. So I did call Scotland Yard again. A guy called Alan McCormack, a real gentleman, helped me a lot. Alan said to me when I told him what I've just told you, he said, you know what, that's the first bit of information I've been told in years, in decades actually, that's new. Not regurgitated, not made up, that's actual fact. He said, I don't even know why they do these repertoires anymore, or write these books, or make these films. Scotland Yard have always known who Jack the Ripper was. And then he gave me the name.
And that name was?
I was going to save it for you, but I was going to say, buy me a book. I'm only joking. So the actual name, he says, the actual words he said was, I don't even know why they do this. We've always known who it was. It was Aaron Kuzminski. Just like that, Aaron Kuzminski. And he only said that to me because I came up with the Michaelmas connection. I said to him, can you tell me more? He said, look, I'm not allowed, but what you can do, and this is the truth, all you have to do, don't look at these websites, go and look for yourself. All the information that you need to solve this, up to the point of the DNA, is out there. You only have to look. It really is there. And instead of just going on certain websites that just people, it's sort of like a spammy type website. That's all I can say. If you do the real research and you do stand up and do some real work, you will find it's all there, which is exactly what I did. So that's how I bought the shawl. That's the reason why I bought the shawl. And everybody's asked me how much, but I can tell you it's cost me a huge 6-figure sum, and about, I would say, where are we now? We're still doing it now, so nearly 8 years of my life. So it certainly didn't cost what I paid for it, let's just say that. So anyway, I bought the shawl, and again, I didn't know back then about forensic science, ancient DNA testing, real research, real genealogy, So I asked, I did ring around a lot of people who claim to be what they call ripperologists, but really nobody wanted to help me, because what I very quickly realised is nearly everybody that's involved in this wants to perpetuate the myth, because that's all they've got, and no one really wanted the real truth. No one really wants to know or find the real murderer behind the legend of Jack the Ripper. So being me, I went and learned how to do it all myself. Then I got asked to do a documentary. It's still on YouTube. I was a lot fatter then, so I made sure I dieted when I saw how big I was on camera. And I met an ancient forensic scientist, an amazing guy. He'd be like a brother to me for the rest of my life. His name's Dr. Jari Lohalainen. Now, Jari, he said to me when we did the documentary, he said, Russ, we're only going to be doing about 2 hours work here. You're not going to find much which reflects what we did, what happened in the documentary. So anyway, I left it there, called him a couple of weeks after and said, look, Yari, can you do me a favour? You're the expert. Can I give you the shawl and just have a look at you? Just tell me, is there anything there that really does link to the fourth murder? He said, you know what, give me a day, leave it with me, and I'll let you know what I find. So I did, and went back about 5:30 in the evening, really nervous, stood there, and he smiled at me. He said, you're not going to believe this. He said, and as I said before, the blue section of the shawl, the inside part, is cut. As we look at it, we would just see little white dots, sort of like decay, if you like, or aging, if you like. He said that's actually arterial blood spatter in the form of slashing. He said, do you see these two big massive clots on the shawl? He said that's evidence of split body parts. A lot of people say to me, what does that actually mean? It means human organs have been placed on that shawl. And he said they're incredibly difficult to forge. You can't forge them. He said, really, you'd have to be a world expert to do that. Now, going back to Catherine Eddowes, sadly, what happened to her, he did slash her throat, and he did take her body parts, a kidney and a uterus. We did find a kidney cell in one of the samples that Yari took. And then what Yari did say to me, he says, down the other end, it looks like bleach. It looks like someone's put bleach on there. He said, no, that's not bleach. That's actually semen. That's what it is. We were taught when we were media trained to say body fluids, but it was actually semen. So the second he told me that, I very nearly did keel over, thinking, oh my God, this really is a map of that murder, of where Catherine Eddowes was and where the shawl was meant to be collected. So I said, look, could you help me? You know, I mean, of course, an ancient DNA forensic scientist, they're very hard to come by, and someone that could be prepared to help me as well. So bless Yari, because he said, yeah, you know what? He was intrigued. I didn't realise how scientists work, but I certainly do now. They like to acquire truth through science. And
Kerry?
Yeah, we're still here, but sadly Russell has dropped out.
Yeah, we've lost Russell right at a critical moment, I have to say.
Oh, no. No. Well, we'll carry on until Russell can come back in. That's absolutely fine. So far it's really fascinating. I mean, the question that I would have asked Russell after we finished would have been, how would he have known that it was... Oh, hello? Russell?
Hey, guys.
And he's back in the room.
Back in the room. You know, that's that bit, you know, when it all goes quiet and all the lights go out and then the murderer strikes, it's that bit, isn't it?
Well, we were hanging on to every word.
Yeah, it's like, don't. So anyway, yeah, so the thing is, what Yari said to me, and again, you know, when you look at what we call the haters, which we just, the water off a duck's back now, what people say about contamination, that, you know, it was handled so many times, how could you get... What Yori said to me, he said, the problem we've got with this is silk. He said, number one, on the surface of silk, skin cells don't stay. So they would actually fall off. So when you look at wool, if you say you take your great-great-grandmother's woolen scarf, her skin cells would still be on there. When we're looking at silk, that wouldn't be the case. He said, we don't know who's touched this shawl in over 100 years. What he had to do was come up with and Yori did, he invented this technique. There is another vacuuming technique. What Yori managed to do is design a process himself that actually collects samples embedded in the weave. And the silk's about, say, 1 millimetre thick. He managed to get uncontaminated samples from the blood samples on the shawl. And from that, he managed to get DNA. Now, when I just say that in a sentence, that took him 6 months of his life to do that. The other thing, which is really, really significant here, is that the blood on that shawl, the second you know you get DNA, that blood on there is human blood. It's not pig blood, not animal blood, it's human blood. So whether it was that shawl was at the murder scene or not, even if it was at another murder scene, what at that point in the investigation, we knew someone had had a throat cut and someone's body parts were placed on that shawl, and that was mind-blowing. He then said to me, Russ, you know what? I've done the hard part, which I agree with him. He said, you go and do the easy part. He said, Russ, go and find me a direct female descendant. I said, sure, mate, I'll just look in Yellow Pages. Of course, it wasn't as easy as that. So what I had to find, if she existed, was Catherine Eddowes' daughter, if she exists. Well, I did search high and low. And what I said about before, sometimes luck was on our side. It really was. Somebody showed, there was a program, you can still see it on YouTube, called Jack the Ripper, Find My Past. And on there is a lady by the name of Karen Miller. And Karen is the direct female descendant of Catherine Eddowes. Right on the telly, right in front of us. So anyway, what I realised was she's the only, other than exhuming Catherine Eddowes, this woman I was watching on the TV was the only person that could help us. If we could get a sample of DNA from it, she was kind enough to do that. We're on, if you like. The game's on, or the game's afoot, as Sherlock would say. So the thing is, I was very mindful of, obviously I know Karen, and she's like going to be I know Karen, I know her family, I know a lot of her relatives now from Catherine Eddowes' side. If Karen said no, the story would have ended. But Karen's not like that. She's an amazing human being, Karen. And of course, she said to me, anything you can help me find out who the murderer. Remember, this is where the human part comes in more now, because Karen's great grandmother was murdered by a serial killer, and she was the fourth murder victim. And people go, wow, Jack the Ripper, but actually there's a human being here. It was her relative, it was her ancestor that was the murder victim. So Karen gave me a DNA sample, and I thought, right, Yari, there you go. And I was expecting the results within a week, as you know, these ambitious scouts as we are. In fact, it was another 6 months before he managed to get the work spot on to where he wanted it to be. And he said to me, you know what, Russ, come to the labs in Liverpool and we film this on camera. He said, come and see. You need to see this rather than me telling you. So I drove to Liverpool. I remember what I was wearing. I remember what happened. I remember the reaction. I remember what we did after. Vividly. He sat me down in his lab. And again, highfalutin, if you can imagine, if you can picture the scene of a real science lab. And he said, Russ, have a look at that. I said, what am I looking at here? He said, Russ, that's 100% DNA match there. So we had that the DNA match. So the match was 100% between Karen, the great-great-great-granddaughter of Catherine Eddowes, the fourth Ripper victim, and the samples, the uncontaminated blood samples that we got DNA from the shawl. So we knew that was Catherine Eddowes' blood on that shawl. That moment was, you can't relive those moments fully, but I can tell you the elation of, wow, that was worth every single second of my life. And same with Yari. So we, at the time, just thought, okay, so we've proved that it was linked to the murder, that this is the only piece of evidence in history, the only piece of evidence in history that exists, and lo and behold, it's in my possession, I'm the owner. That blew me away. So my literary agent, who's one of your classic English gentlemen, a gentleman called Robert Smith, his name is, said to me, Russ, you know what? This industry, and you would call this a Ripper industry nowadays, people make a lot of money on the back of this myth and legend, which I don't agree with, by the way. You'll find they overdo, well, I won't go into the tours now, but anyway. He said, you know what? They don't want you to prove this. This world, this Ripper community do not want this solved. They will come after you and debunk everything you've done, which a lot of them still try and do, but it certainly doesn't work for us. He said, you have to do more work. So I'd already given a year of my life, and so had Yari. He said, you know what? What can I say? Well, what can I do? He said, well, go and date it. Do it. Prove it's not a modern day forgery. So then, so where do we start? Thankfully, Yari, the expert that he is, he said, you know what? I know a perfect man for this, a guy called Dr. Fayez Ismail, who's a dye analyst. The Fayez can take a square centimetre of any piece of fabric on this planet. He can tell you when it was made and where it was made. So over to Fayez, and he did the work that we needed to do, and it's called mass spectrometry, the actual science behind it. And this is what Fayez said to me. He said this. He said, Russ, the first thing you need to know, a street prostitute would never be able to afford a piece of silk of this size at all. Now, what people might not know is that Catherine Eddowes, the day before she was murdered, had to pawn her own boots for food and a roof over her head. So there's certainly no way she would have been able, not only would she not been able to afford the shawl anyway, but she certainly wouldn't have kept hold of it if she had to pawn her own boots. So that was the first thing. He said to me, it had to be a middle to upper middle class family that would have owned this. Would you believe that Aaron Kosminski's family were prominent tailors in East End back then? So they were quite well off. His brother Isaac certainly was. He then said to me, he said, you see this blue section, the bit that's covered in all this blood spatter? I said, yeah. He said, if you put that in water, all that dye will run. It's water soluble. He said, if a street prostitute was out in the rain and she wore that shawl, all the dye would have run, because it's a rudimentary plant dye. It's not synthetic dye. So we date that, immediately predated it 1854. So then finally he said to me, do you know that blue dye? It comes from St. Petersburg in northern Russia. Well, if you realise that Aaron Kosminski came from Poland that was under Russian rule, also known as Prussia, you start really realising that if it wasn't owned by Catherine Eddowes, there's no chance it was owned by Catherine Eddowes. Then the only other person that would have left that shawl at that scene was the murderer himself. Again, a span. Do you know what? That's 5 years ago, I think I made that revelation. Yeah, about 5. I can remember it was about now, in about February. It really, the spine tingling, oh my God. So that means that shawl had nothing to do with Catherine Eddowes personally, other than it was left by her body. Then the murderer must have left it there. Now, as I explained a little while earlier, we found we found semen on the shawl, and again, people have said, well, he was just a customer, and so what? But the thing is, there's only one person that would have left any ejaculate on that shawl. If it wasn't Catherine Eddowes, obviously not Catherine Eddowes, but it would have been the murderer himself. And the overwhelming realisation that, number one, the shawl never belonged to Catherine Eddowes. It was the murderer. He left it at the murder scene, which I will come on to. But the thing is, he ejaculated on that shawl, and lo and behold, if we could get DNA from that piece of any of that ejaculate on that shawl, we've actually got the DNA from the serial killer that the world's come to know as Jack the Ripper. Again, this just to live this, I remember living this process. It's quite sensational as I went through it. It was sort of, that realization was massive. And again, there was only 4 of us in the world that knew what I was up to. There's 2 scientists, me, Yori, and my wife at the time. And again, trying to contain this information. So anyway, back in the labs, Yori says to me, you know what, Russ, this is beyond my specialty. We're going to need the help of what's a specific type of science. And as I say it, just you have to excuse me, but it's a sperm head analysis we need. And again, thankfully, Yori, through his connections, found there's only 3 in Europe. Yori managed to find one who was willing to help us. And he, again, Yori managed to get uncontaminated samples. And it was, this was in the, I think it was the September when we did this piece of work. And then on the 12th of December 2012 at 5:30, I'll never forget, it was raining, it's dark. Yori calls me and says, you know what, Russ, we've got DNA. We've got 18 cells, which is a very small amount, but we can get DNA. You know what you need to do. And that's what he said to me. So Aaron Kosminski's buried in East Ham Cemetery. I called the Jewish United Synagogue, who run that cemetery, And the man that runs it, I told him a very brief, sort of cut down version of what I've told you. He said, wow, that is phenomenal. I wanted to exhume Aaron Kosminski because, believe it or not, you can get DNA from the pulp of a tooth. And you can go back 10,000 years, still, even mammoths, you can still get DNA from the pulp, the inside of a tooth. So all I wanted was what Yori told me. Exhume the body, and he will do a DNA extraction, and there we go. If that is who the murderer is, we will know. So, of course, I'm not hiding anything, not pretending anything. Straight to where the man, this person's buried. Let's exhume him. Let's prove this once and for all. Nothing to hide. Of course, very disappointingly, the United Synagogue said under Jewish law, we're never going to be able to exhume him. And that was what I thought at the time was the end of the story. Yori said to me, look, did Aaron Kosminski have any sisters? I said, yeah. And one that you can have is Matilda Lubnowski-Cohen. He said, did she have any kids? I said, yeah, she had. Obviously, I know. I've done all the family research. He said, yeah, she had 10 children. He said, well, if you could find me a direct female descendant from Matilda, I can do the same work as I did with Catherine and Karen. I'll never forget, that was a freezing cold Monday in January. I found the direct female descendant in October. It took me 10 months, but I found her, met up with her, told her the story. She was fascinated, and she agreed to give me a DNA sample. Of course, where I came from, I gave her my word, and I stand by it to the day I die. And no one will ever be able to tell the world who she is. I promised to keep her anonymous, which I always will do. But the race was on. We've got the DNA from the semen on the shawl that we placed, that we know that was at the murder scene of Catherine Eddowes. And we've got a sample of DNA from the sister of the murderer, of the man that Scotland Yard told me was the murderer known as Jack the Ripper. Comes to February 2014 now, so you can see it's been quite a journey. February 2014, 8:30, Friday night, Yari goes, check your inbox. Just like that, check your inbox. My heart in my throat. I know we were getting close. I go to my computer, and Yari he is a very humble man. If you ever meet him, he's a fantastic individual. He says, you know what? I don't even mind saying for once in my life, this is a work of genius. We've managed to get a DNA sample, a workable DNA sample from a stain that's over 120 years old. I then press the button for the attachment, and there on that Friday night was 100% DNA match between the descendant of the sister of Aaron Kosminski and the DNA sample that we got from the semen that was deposited on the shawl, that we realised wasn't Catherine Eddowes, but we certainly proved it was at the crime scene. At that point, that pivotal point in my life and Yari's life, we realised once and for all that we'd actually proved the true identity of Jack the Ripper.
Wow. At this moment in time, we're going to take a little break, give you all a little bit of a breather, catch your thoughts, and we're going to be back. We're not going to cut it at an hour. We're going to continue because it's such a fascinating subject. Don't you agree, Kerry?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break.
You're listening to Seventh Sanctum with Kerry Ann, only on Parasearch UK Radio.
Welcome back. I'm Kerry Ann, and I'm with my co-host Kerry Greenaway on Seventh Sanctum on Parasearch UK Radio. And we are being joined this evening with Russell Edwards. And we, at a wow moment, we kind of left it there to have our quick break. Honestly, I was woohooing as you were getting to the end of that segment, Russell. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So, where do you go from there?
Well, of course, when we released the news and I released my book, of course, the Ripper industry, they set this quest and trying to destroy what we've done, which actually they can't really, but they are, I would say, left them quaking in the boots.
I would say it did.
Yeah. Of course, I'm not, on the boards or anything like this, postulating who the murderer was. If Scotland Yard said to me it was another Ripper suspect, I would have worked on that Ripper suspect. But it was Scotland Yard that said to me this is who it was because he was identified. Now, this is the thing. So, Scotland Yard said to me that Aaron Kosminski, shortly after the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, the fifth victim, he attacked his own sister with a knife and he was arrested. Now, this is virtually word for word what Scotland Yard told me. He said he was taken out of the public view, so not taken anywhere in London. He was transported down to a retired, it's like a police retirement home in Hove called Clarendon Villas. It still exists. Well, no, the building's still there. It's not a police seaside retirement home anymore. And he was put in a room. Now, I said earlier that when Elizabeth Stride, the third Ripper victim, was murdered or was being attacked, there was an eyewitness, the only eyewitness to actually see one of the victims being attacked rather than a victim standing with another. So what Scotland Yard said to me, he said, you know what, you tell me the name of who you think the eyewitness was, and if you get it right, I'll tell you the story. And I got it bang on. And the actual eyewitness, a guy called Israel Swartz, he was the man that saw the man described between 5'5", 5'7", stocky, dark hair, dark moustache, foreign complexion, foreign as in Jewish. Israel Swartz was taken down to the seaside home. Now, Aaron Kosminski was placed in a room. Israel Swartz was what was called confronted. So back then, as I say, strict rules for the police. What this was sort of a lower, low key, less attention grabbing. And Aaron Kosminski was confronted with Israel Swartz, and the actual statement in the records, the police record says, an unhesitating ID. That was the man Israel Swartz saw attacking Elizabeth Stride shortly before she was found with a throat cut by Louis Deemschutz. The police had their man. The only trouble was Israel Swartz wouldn't testify against Jewish law. There's a few people over the years, even I've had the Home Office with me on walks, I've had the Ministry of Justice with me on walks, I've had mortuary attendants, you name it, I've had people come with me privately on these tours of mine, really to tell the truth rather than just to make a ton of money. What they said to me was that in Jewish law, if you see somebody committing a crime, if you don't report it, you're as guilty as them. But more importantly, Israel Swartz didn't want to give up Aaron Kosminski because he was Jewish and giving Jews up to Gentile justice. So they had the man, but the eyewitness wouldn't stand up in a court of law. And because there wasn't a formal ID, where you have like 10 people or 6 people and you put the hand on the shoulder saying that's the man, because of course we're talking about Jack the Ripper, remember, that a confrontation was considered a weak ID. What I'm telling you is what Scotland Yard had told me. And that confrontation in itself wouldn't stand up in a court of law either. So what they did was they certified him insane. They put him in Stepney Workhouse, I think it was about March 1889, and then officially they moved into Colney Hatch Asylum in this time now, 7th of February 1891, and that's where he stayed for 3 years. Again, as you do this research, if you do the primary research, if you go to Farringdon, the actual admissions record, the actual book, the actual paperwork that Aaron Kosminski was admitted, it's there. You can go and see it. Anybody could go and access this. You have to go through special permission. You have to make sure you go through a whole process. You have to request this information, but you can actually hold this admission record. It gives it all there. Then it all went cold on me because I had to pay an archivist, because Leavesden Asylum was where Aaron Kosminski was eventually transported to until he died in March 1919, age 54 of gangrene. But basically, they had the man, they couldn't prosecute him properly, they certified him insane, they locked him up in asylum, hence no more Ripper murders, end of the story. The police knew they had their man, and it was the sensationalism of the press. If you go to the Bishopsgate library, which is by Liverpool Street, you will read all the documents there where they say that the perpetuated myth of Jack the Ripper will always be there. All going back over 100 years, this, because it's such a whodunit, when actually it was a Polish Jewish immigrant. It was 23 at the time of the murders. He was insane, criminally insane. Look at what this man did. He got caught, he got certified, got put into an asylum and died. And that's the truth. But to say the truth, most people will not think, when you think of the fantasy, and I do mean the word fantasy, of Jack the Ripper, the romance of it has actually nothing to do with what really happened. And what I've just told you is what really happened.
Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. Kerry, have you got any more questions?
Oh my goodness, where do you start? Over the years, there's been so many different alleged suspects of Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
Now, I know the evidence you've collected is absolutely phenomenal, but there's been a lot of other people that have investigated quite heavily into Jack the Ripper and come up with, allegedly, so similar evidence regarding Jack the Ripper. So, I mean, like I said, there's been so many suspects, like William Gull, that was the physician guy, there was links to the royal family, there was artists, there's been so many. And, I just wondered, before you had these DNA results that you've come up with, did you look into any of these other people, or did you just purely focus?
I certainly did. Quite freakily connected to me. How's that? So I'm from a place called Birkenhead, which is it's where you get the ferry across the Mersey from Liverpool. And would you know, which is how I met Yari, a guy, a very bad sadistic killer, a guy called Frederick Bailey Deeming, and married a woman from Birkenhead and lived in Birkenhead. That really caught my curiosity. And if you look at the story of that murderer, it's a very just terrible man, but it wasn't him. If you look at Walter Sickert, which was Patricia Cornwell's favourite, Walter Sickert connected to me. He performed. In fact, I was standing right by there on Sunday, the Floral Pavilion in New Brighton, and that's where I was, Walter. And that's what. So these people sort of undulated through me, through where I come from, and always brought me back to the story. But Walter Sickert, unfortunately, as we know, serial killers just they escalate until they get caught or something happens to them. Walter Sickert was an artist. So if you look at his career, after the fifth murder, he went on painting, even painted a member of the royal family. And so you sort of, okay, I've had a go being a serial killer, I'll do something else. It doesn't work like that. It goes against the MO of this type, that what they are as people. But the interesting thing about Patricia Cornwell is she got the DNA from the back of a stamp of the Openshaw letter, which when we did if you look online for the Demon documentary, you'll see that the DNA is actually female, so she got it completely wrong. But I'm sure she wouldn't, basically, don't take my word for it, it's out there for you to see as a fact. William Gull was in his 70s and he'd had 2 strokes. So if you ever look at a picture of William Gull, he's a big guy. I would say fantastic possible great movie line, storyline suspect for the film From Hell. But no, the murderer was in his 20s, which Aaron Kuzminski was, and wouldn't have been. How could William Gull escape? Because he was an old man who'd already had his second stroke. So when you really look at the facts, you could throw any name. Prince Albert Victor, there's a good one. Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's son, future king. Did you know on the nights of the murders he was I think it was at Balmoral, Queen Victoria. So Queen Victoria was his actual witness, or his alibi, if you like. You couldn't get a better alibi if you tried. So he wasn't even in Whitechapel on the nights of the murders, or most of them. And the story goes on. And really, it got to a point where, I do say this to a lot of people, you can actually name anybody as Jack the Ripper and make a story out of it, but it doesn't mean that he was the murderer. I got told that recently somebody's just brought a book out now because he lived on a street that was near Mitre Square, so now he's Jack the Ripper. To me, it was always who I thought it was. Once I'd spoken to Scotland Yard, I realised that's the route I should be going. There's over 160 suspects. You could be there forever. Jill the Ripper. Jill the Ripper was named Jill the Ripper, and everyone thought, oh, could be a woman. Actually, Jill the Ripper was a woman that murdered her lover's wife and child, and she walked along Regent Park's road with a dead baby in a pram. No, certainly MO that's close to murdering these women. And the story just goes on. The more you look at read it, you think, well, how could that's just nonsense. And you can actually dispel nearly every single suspect on this. If you look at the actual three that were really named, it was Kosminski, Montague John Druitt, and Michael Ostrog. Well, Michael Ostrog did come, he came from an area, it was only 10 miles from Kosminski, but Ostrog was 50 odd. So the man that was seen with these victims, especially the man that was the eyewitness that Israel Swartz said it was 20s. Ostrog's in his 50s, so how could you get that wrong? So you just couldn't. If you ever come, I'm sure you're more than welcome to come and have a walk around with me. If you stand where Israel Swartz stood to where the eyewitness, you could actually see the whites of the teeth. It's that close. So there's no way Ostrog could have been that. And Druitt was the only other real suspect. And that was because he died. He was found dead a month after the last murder in the Thames. So other than that, no, you can actually really, if you do the work, which I have done, you can dispel nearly every single suspect just on just common sense. So there you go.
Wow. That's just like got rid of half the theories I had.
Well, don't forget, guys, I actually I've lived it for 15 years. You know, it's sort of, people come up with just, no. Just very easy. No, that's not him.
One of the points that was brought up in the chat room regarding the shawl, now I think I know the answer to this, but I'll let you answer the question, was if it was left at the crime scene by the Ripper, if it was like by a man, why wouldn't it have been like a black shawl? Why was it like silk patterned?
Thank you very much. You know what? Go on, tell me what you think and I'll tell you what it was.
I think it's to do with I don't know if it's to do with the dyeing process or something like that. No?
What it was, no. The shawl was to hand. It was available to him. But the pattern, I've given you the pattern for Michaelmas daisies. He gave the date of the next murder.
So you think it was symbolic?
There you go. There you go. The Michaelmas daisies. He went out on. He went out with the intention to murder on the night of the 29th of September, Michaelmas, and then he left the shawl there. And guess what? If you look at, and this is again something only little old me found and discovered. It's Encyclopedia Britannica if you want to look up Michaelmas, by the way. The next date of Michaelmas is the 8th of November, and that's the night he went out, and in the early hours he murdered Mary Jane Kelly. So he actually left the police a clue for the next time he's going out. And no one picked that up except for me, believe it or not.
They just overlooked that significance.
Yeah.
Or was it because they didn't realise the shawl existed at that time?
Well, what
they just
was,
discounted it.
Amos Simpson escorted the body of Catherine Eddowes to the mortuary, and he asked if he could take it home for his wife because she was a seamstress, and it is a huge piece of silk, and that's what happened. But again, going back to those days, you know what happens to all the evidence? They used to burn it. They never kept it back then, so they burnt it. So in fact, he left it there. No one, obviously. That's how I really checked the facts that I could be in full ownership of this. And Scotland Yard said, yeah, no, that's yours. But that's what happened. And then Amos Simpson, I would say, in his naivety, he took it back to his wife, and his wife absolutely freaked out on him when she found out where it's from. She cut out there was a lot more blood on it apparently, and she cut out that bit, folded it up, put it in it's like a wax sea chest. Left it there and then gave it to the niece, who then gave it to her daughter, then gave it to the guy I bought it from. But just one little thing I want you to know. Again, everyone thinks Amos Simpson was there on special duties. And once everyone thinks, okay, so everyone's on the look for the Ripper. Amos Simpson wasn't there at Mitre Square to patrol for the Ripper. He was actually there at what's called Finian duties, which, believe it or not, because it's only about 8 minutes to the docks from there. Scotland Yard was bombed in 1884, if you don't know. And would you believe that they found the cache, if you like, the cache, as in CACHE, of explosives? Guess where it was? In one of the houses at Mitre Square. So that's where the Irish were storing the explosions. So they were just seeing if any of they were actually on the hunt for the Irish, and that's what Amos Simpson was doing at the time. And he just happened upon this, the murder, the victim, and asked if he could take the shawl. So that's how he got to get the shawl.
My goodness. Now, there has been criticism regarding the DNA testing on the shawl, and people, from what I read, and I don't know anything about DNA testing, I just like to put that out there, but something to do with like a decimal point being out, and then if that's the case, it would have thrown the whole results out. How do you answer those
you ready
critics?
For this? Yeah. Okay, well, nonsense. Just remember, most of the critics aren't forensic scientists. But what has happened, how Yari explained this to me, was the decimal point is exactly where it should be, not what they think it is. And what is more significant, and it's quite mind-blowing when Yari explained this to me, that I think 95% of the DNA of all of us on this planet is exactly the same. It's the 5%, it's the difference. And that's what makes us all different. And what people have done is they've tried to throw a decimal point error, which is not true whatsoever, to try and keep this myth perpetuated. Now, when we brought the story out, the whole world, literally, I remember being interviewed globally by nearly every country on the planet. I remember being in all the headlines. And the only newspaper that stood out was one that tried to go against, to try and say disprove it rather than it's been proved. And that's the story, and everybody latched onto that. Everybody that wants to perpetuate the myth latched onto that. So it's just false and unfounded. There you go.
Okay, well, that answers those critics out there that might have been thinking that. Now, going back to Kosminski himself, we've covered him in regards to links to, to the crimes rather. Can you tell it? Obviously you do. A little bit about him and where he lived, and what he did, that sort of thing. His background a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so when he was he grew up and he was born in a place called Kladowa over in Poland. And again, what we call the pogroms, they basically persecuted the Jews so much so, as I said, there was a mass exodus from Poland. And he was one of that crowd, I say that mass exodus back in 1881. When he was 8 years of age, his dad died. And basically, he was more how you would term a drag-along kid. Now, this is what was told to me by one of the keepers of Leasden Asylum. So I'll just say it. I suppose it's okay to say it at this time of night. But what I've been told, which makes perfect sense when you look at his bitter hatred for women, is that he was abused by his mother, who happened to be in her 40s. So basically, if you want it in a nutshell, he couldn't face killing his mother first, so he went to like the lowest class on the planet, which was these unfortunates, and he was working his way up to kill his own mother. So when he actually killed 5 victims, he mutilated Mary Kelly, then he tried to kill his sister, and the next one would have been his mother. It was stopped, and he didn't manage to kill his sister. So that's what happened. He was how can I put this? He was what's called a misogynist. He had a bitter hatred of women, and that's a real bitter hatred of women, and that's documented. If you look at the admission records of Kosminski, it says, number 1, he's Hebrew. Number 2, he was suffering from mania. Number 3, he was, and this was given by, basically, he said his brain gave up. So he was eating food from the gutter, and he was hearing voices and hallucinations, which falls in line with the condition he was suffering from. Significantly as well, you would say like his occupation was a hairdresser, or like a hairdresser surgeon. Back then, barber surgeons, you ever heard of those, where they used to perform rudimentary operations? But he had anatomical knowledge. I've had a mortician stand with me at the murder scene of Catherine Eddowes and saying there's no way that man had no anatomical knowledge. You can't get to a kidney, the uterus, but the kidney's in a specific place. You have to know exactly what you're looking for. And that's really all makes sense and falls in line of when you build up a mental picture or an actual fact picture of Kosminski. Dad died at 8, secondary caregiver, mother, primary caregiver, abused him. He developed a massive hatred of women because of this. The 4 victims represented his mother because they were all in the 40s. Mary Kelly was more an opportunistic one because she was inside. She had her own room, and even though she was 25, he had time to do what he wanted to do with her, where he didn't with the other 4. Then he tried to kill his sister, and it all sort of, yes, this all started to make sense. But when you look at serial killers, they're at the heightened sort of early 20s to 35. Kosminski fell right in that at the age of 23. He'd been in Whitechapel for 7 years before he committed these crimes, and he certainly would have had to have a working knowledge of all the streets and the catacombs, the little rat runs, which I've done over the years. Of the area, to know how to escape, where to escape. But what I can't tell you is what precipitated his first murder, what really was the start of this. I've done a few, again, primary research on his family. Was there any catalyst? He had his brother Wolf and sister-in-law Betsy had a daughter, Rachel, the year before he died of cholera, and I don't know if that was something to do with him. No, I couldn't. Again, and I don't speculate why he started. It was just that was the time when he did it. I can only tell you that he murdered 3 women in accordance to the date of Michaelmas, but we're talking about a psychotic 23-year-old with a bitter hatred of women that really wanted to take out all this venomous anger that he contained within himself, and he did in a very violent manner to work his way up to kill his mother. And that's all I can tell you, really.
Kind of fits, doesn't it, really?
It does, yeah. This is, again, if it wasn't, you sort of, I found all this after we proved it, really. It wasn't along the journey. And actually, that's going into the second book, which we've been working on because of course I'm still on the journey now, but I'm not allowed to say what I'm up to. But yeah, we're still doing the journey, and this is coming into the second book.
Now, one of the things... Oh, sorry.
No, go on, sorry.
Now, one of the things we talked about earlier, we had a little chat off air, and one of the things that became apparent was that anybody who has seriously investigated the Jack the Ripper cases has had some really strange feelings and things happen, almost as if there was a force thwarting the investigation. And you had experienced this as well, hadn't you?
Yeah. Oddly enough, there is, again, you need to live these streets. You need to, what's called develop a felt sense. It's exactly what I had to do for who this was. And yeah, I've had some very, I would say, curious moments where you don't feel you're alone. You feel, there's a definite, there's an evil, or you again. You have to be there. You have to. It's one thing. It's really saying, look, I saw a ghost. It was over there. But the day in, day outness of trying to study a case like this, research a case in a thorough manner, there's a lot. There's something here. And I think when we spoke off air, I did have a very kind lady that did a paranormal, I say not investigation, but she came with me. What scared me was, as I say this story, which I'm so used to saying now, what she said to me when I took her to the third murder scene of Elizabeth Stride. I know factually what happened to her as she was attacked. I know factually when she was discovered. What I don't know is what the in-between was. This paranormal, I say paranormal lady, sorry, this lady who was a paranormal investigator told me what he did, the in-between, the actual murder, what he did. And she did it so convincingly, and it really shook me. It shook me so much that when we finished, I think I sat for a good half hour just staring into space. I couldn't believe what had happened in the way it happened. And the thing she told me, it's sort of, there's an evil, I would say, if I said it's an evil presence, it feels like an evil presence. But that's just me. Anybody that wants to go down there, and rather than just, I know, let's walk the streets for an hour and a half, hear the blurb that these tour guides give, and then keep the mystery perpetuated, and off you go home. Wow, that was great. But actually really live the experience, have a few hours, take time, stand where at these places, and there's a feeling that you can feel it. But you have to, it's not just sort of crowds of 100 people walking the rainy cobbled streets of the East End. You really had to experience this to say what I've just said to you, that it feels like a dark, evil presence there.
Wow. I'm definitely going to do the walk with you, that's for sure.
Yeah, come on down.
Yeah, and we're going to look to do a little on-air interview and as we go along as well. For those that are listening with us, we've got Sin in particular who's actually chomping at the bit. She's asking you to fly over to her, or she can come fly over here because she'd love to come walk and talk with you as well. So that'd be great for those that aren't able to come to the walk themselves because they're in different countries or for whatever reason. We'd love to do that. Come along and have a show on the radio about it as well.
Yeah, by all means, be good fun.
Definitely. Well, I think that'll be everything for this evening. We've gone over about half hour, but honestly, time has flown past. And those in the chat room have really enjoyed the show. James Steele, Sin in particular, both said they're amazing. And James even says spellbinding. Really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for coming along and speaking with us. And we really do look forward to, once we get off air and that, we'll sort something out. Really look forward to coming on to that walk with you and talking more about your discoveries and your findings. But here I want to say thank you to Russell Edwards for joining us this evening. If you want to have a look at his book, Naming Jack the Ripper, as well as I think Richard has actually put the links in the chat rooms, and we can share them on our pages as well for Russell Edwards tours and walks that he does. And I want to say thank you to Kerry Greenaway as well, who's helped in the studio with me this evening and joined me tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me. This subject fascinates me, and Russell is so knowledgeable. It's just been an absolute joy. Thank you so much, Russell. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you very much.
And we say good night.
Good night.
You're listening to Seventh Sanctum with Kerry Ann, only on Parasearch UK Radio.